Now, the main elements in this room that we're going to study and discuss and obsess over for the next 9 or 10 months, the first thing is, you often hear that phrase in real estate. There's 3 important things: location, 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 right? In musicals, I think there are also 3 important things: story, story, and story. And if you're a lyricist or a composer, I'm not leaving you out, because I really, really strongly believe that the entire team is responsible for the story. That doesn't just belong to the book writer. It's the team that puts the story together, and all of the elements, the dialogue, the lyrics, and the music, all have to be contributing to that story. That's part of the nature of this being a collaborative workshop. We really approach it that way. The team writes the story. John Sparks, our founder, has always said, a musical is about someone who wants something, what they do to get it, and whether they get it or not. That sounds extraordinarily simple, maybe even simplistic, but I have found over the years that if you keep going back to that when you're writing your musical, if you get stuck or things aren't working or you're not sure what to do next, just keep going back to that and say, who is this musical about? What do they want? And do I have them pursuing it actively? If you keep going back there, you can keep your story on track, whatever else is going on around that. Another way to think of that is a good musical needs to have a lead character who goes on a journey, and we need to want to go on that journey with them. Or another way to think of it is a lead character who learns something, meaning they're not the same person at the end of the show that they were at the beginning of the show. And that's the purpose for the story. Now, I do want to clarify that when I talk about story, I'm differentiating that from plot. They're similar concepts, but they're a little bit different. To my mind, plot is the nuts and bolts of what happens. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. That's the plot. And of course, it's important. But the story is what the musical is about. So it's much more aligned with the theme. What is it that you want your audience to walk away with when they leave the theater? That is your story. It's important when you're developing a new musical, I think, not to get lost in the plot and get so excited about the little plot twists and all the fun things that are happening that you forget about the story. Because the plot is important, but at the end of the day, it's just a tool that you use to illuminate your theme. So you've got to always keep coming back to that, to the story. Now, I want to say that's also true. Sometimes it sounds like I'm being very heavy about this and, you're illuminating theme and it's all very serious. But I think it applies if you're writing a comedic musical as well. We tend not to use the term musical comedy anymore because people find that a little denigrating. We say musical theater because because that way the story you're telling can be happy, it can be sad, it can be many, many different things. Musical comedy implies that it's just meant to be fun. And musical theater embraces so much more. But in terms of story and theme, I still think that even if you're writing a comedy, all of that is still true. And if you're writing a comedy and you feel like it's enough to be just funny, that's okay, and you might find some success. Just funny is fun. We all like it. But in my personal opinion, that is not going to last. It's not going to become part of the canon. People aren't going to be talking about it 10 years from now. It's a flash in the pan. If you want a comedy that lasts and that people keep doing and people keep loving and they keep going back to it, it has to be more than just funny. It also has to have something to say. A quick example of that for me would be something like Avenue Q, which is hysterically funny. I mean, I've laughed from one end of it to the other. It's one of the funniest musicals I've ever seen in my life. But I also feel like it has a lot to say. It's about, pursuing your purpose and figuring out what to do with your life after you get out of college. That doesn't bog down the story, so it doesn't take away from the humor, but it makes all the humor so much more meaningful. At some point, I could tell you a story about I know Jeff Marks quite well, who was the co-writer with Bobby Lopez on the lyrics and the music for Avenue Q. And when they were first working on that show, because they developed it at BMI, it was their 15-minute musical at the end of their term at BMI, and they intended it to be they wanted it to be a TV show that was an episodic show that was Sesame Street for grown-ups. And they didn't intend for it to have any kind of cohesive story that would be told over the course of an evening. They intended it to be episodic, like Sesame Street. And then when they presented it at BMI and then were approached by producers, their producer told them, I'll pick you up. I want to do this show, but you need a book writer. And he brought in Jeff Liddy, who wound up writing the book and Jeff Liddy and Jeff Marks and Bobby Lopez all got Tonys for that show. And Jeff Marks will be the first one to tell you that if Jeff Liddy hadn't come along, that wouldn't have happened. It still would have been fun. It might have been a fun TV show, but it wouldn't have been a great musical that can last. Now, I want to, these things that we've been talking about, all these things that I've been talking about in terms of story, also apply if you're writing a play, or for that matter, if you're writing a movie. Any kind of storytelling is storytelling. So what makes a musical different? What do we approach differently about a musical from a play, or in particular a play, because they're both on stage? Now, the obvious answer is in a musical, everybody bursts into song. Of course, that is the difference. But what happens because of the fact people burst into song in a musical, that also means there are certain other differences that you have to take into consideration when you're developing a new musical. Obviously, any story, and anyone who's ever studied storytelling knows that any story has to have conflict and it has to have high stakes. Musicals certainly don't have the market cornered on that. Everything has to have that. But in a musical, when the conflict is really going and the stakes are really, really high, that's when people sing. And that's when we get inside their heads. We get to know what they're really thinking, their innermost thoughts, their truths, in a way that usually you don't get to in a play. And because of that, because you have those musical moments, that means that the book itself has to be, the actual spoken words have to be really concise and economical in a way that a play doesn't have to be. Because you got to leave room for the songs, and you got to let the songs do their work. So that puts a big burden on the book writer in the team, because you have to be concise, and every single word that you write that's spoken has to simultaneously reveal character and move the plot along and lead inevitably to the next song. Nothing can be in there without a purpose like that. There's no time for it. In a musical, also, one of the other differences is you can indeed rely on the power of music and lyrics to do some of the storytelling for you. The dialogue obviously doesn't have to do all of the storytelling, because music and lyrics, especially when combined, can do a lot of that work for you. Often, lyrics can tell something more potently than dialogue alone, and when you add the music too, sometimes the music can tell a story without even having to have lyrics. An example for that, for me, is the song "There's a Place for Us" in West Side Story. When we first hear it in the show, it's a love duet, when Maria and Tony declare their love for each other and their hope that someday they might be able to live in a world where the differences between them that are causing issues won't be there, that they will live in a better world. Then at the end of the show, when Tony is dead and Maria is grieving, the Jets and the Sharks together lift up Tony's body and process out with him. And while they go, you hear ba 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 ba. No lyric. And you don't need the lyric, because you already heard the lyric married to that music, and it's intrinsically bound with it. Whenever you hear that music ever again, you hear those words and you know what that means, and it's really powerful, and you don't even need the lyrics.